I must have got the caffeination exactly on point this time because I'm running over the 15 minutes on almost every video because I'm actually engaged in what I'm talking about. But I'm gonna, to get it out of the way, I'm gonna go ahead and read that video or that comment I made on that Team Fortress 2 video. And the sort of pretext is that they were talking about the visual design and how it doesn't really fit with the supposed art style of Team Fortress 2. But whatever they had said about mapping design or whatever, I had pointed out something that was, I'd like, what I think is basic stuff. I'll just go ahead and read it, but I'm going to be holding the phone because my second phone I don't have, so I'm just going to have to read the picture I took off here. So I don't know if the audio will sound like shit or not, but whatever. So anyway, I'm just going to read what I wrote and then maybe expound or do another video on it. But I wrote that, speaking of thinking through the detailing work, this map has some mapping flaws that have been ever present in Source Engine custom maps since the very beginning, even on official maps from Half-Life 2 onward. Maybe as early as Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, but haven't played it in forever. The brushwork on the non-metal parts, concrete or plastic or whatever it is, of the gate at 642 in the video is a great example. The overdark shading on the underside of the capitals of the pilasters and other trim decorations is what happens if you're not careful about chopping up brushwork or manually positioning textures so that the center of their associated luxel positions are exposed to lit areas. You can also see it on parts of the adjacent white building. You see it a lot on architectural greebles of all kinds. Pediments, compound arches, cornices, oculuses, soffits, and coins are places you can usually notice it the easiest, usually on the undersides. You see it on plinths too, but not as much since the map usually has artificial or sunlighting from above to cover the poorly thought out geometry. Sorry for the esoteric architectural language, but I'm trying to be specific. Wikipedia has a glossary of architecture terms if you need it. I had to use it as well. Source Engine has some very odd ways of handling texture and light map UVs that are not well known about and poorly documented at best, such as the luxel for example, the luxel positions used for the light maps are directly tied to the texture applied to the face, so scaling, translating, and rotating the texture will affect the appearance of shadows, even if everything else about the lighting remains the same. This is irrespective of the luxel scale chosen, and then the light maps can affect brushwork by a highly obfuscated luxel limit that isn't based on the luxel scale, but is instead an absolute number. So decreasing luxel scale isn't necessarily a solution either. And again, even at low luxel scales, the luxel positioning can still be a problem, possibly making correct lighting with the texture oriented as desired impossible. Source also automatically chops brushes every so many units of the grid. I don't remember what the number is, 512 or something, which can also fuck up lighting unexpectedly. Suffice to say, the slightly thicker, thinner, or differently colored gradients. All right, hold on. Suffice to say, the slightly thicker, thinner, or differently colored grid lines in Hammer Editor actually mean something. They're not just for show. Weirdly, even though in my opinion this stuff should be day one knowledge for beginner level design, in practice I rarely see even maps made by experienced and talented mappers account for this stuff. Maybe I just care about shit that doesn't matter, I don't know. Most of this stuff I had to derive empirically from just fucking with Hammer for 22 years. And this is sort of tangentially related. I could have made another video about this, but I'm just going to mention it now while I'm thinking about it. A similar issue would be like edict limits or other entity limits in Source Engine games. Now, they're essentially documented, but at the same time, they don't make any fucking sense to be there. So one of the problems I had, I mentioned to somebody in a post that there was a point, a couple years ago, I had decompiled one of the existing Left 4 Dead 1 maps, and I was basically altering it to look how I wanted it to look, adding different stuff to it, and it wasn't expected to be playable. I just wanted to do stuff that looked cool, and I like the overall art style of the original Left 4 Dead. But at a point, I hit a problem where I couldn't compile the map because of the overlay limit, which just shows how many overlays I use. But then the problem was, I tried to switch to CSGO, which I already had all the assets of, basically every Source game, put into it anyway. So I really didn't have to change anything. I could just copy the map over. Well, that didn't work either, because like I had used so many overlays that even CSGO couldn't handle it. Now the overlay limit is part of BSP, and it's not actually a limit of the engine. So you could hypothetically use a custom editor or a custom VBSP or whatever. Okay, well that didn't fucking work either. I tried a custom VBSP, it didn't work. I tried alternate hammer editor, alternatives to hammer editor, that didn't fucking work. And I was like, holy fuck, dude. So like at that point I couldn't even compile the level anymore, right? But there's all these stupid hidden like intricacies of Source Engine, and stuff like that will stick out to me all the time. Another thing I mentioned is like, dude, why the fuck can I put an overlay on a brush entity? What, like, there's nothing really valid stopping me from doing that. You just chose to not let me do that. So now I got to create some weird no-drawed surface where I, put a transparent texture on it. Maybe if I'm lucky, I can just edit the material. Maybe if I'm not lucky, I have to create a whole new texture. And it's like, this is just all totally arbitrary limitations. And like, for an example, why does, like this Quake derivative, edict limit, that like, even if they increase it, is why have it there in the first place? Hypothetically, I understand, okay, maybe if there's too many edicts or like whatever type of entity, yeah, maybe that could slow the level down. But it's like, well, a half competent designer is going to be aware of that and just voluntarily not put so many. Why do you have to put this hard limit that's just going to become a pain in the ass in 2 years when computers are more than capable of, adding those extra 3 edicts or fucking whatever? It's stupid. Like, I ran into that. Like, I was trying to make a Counter-Strike 1.6 map, but the like default hammer stuff or Worldcraft or whatever, like, it was saying I was using too many textures. I'm like, you stupid motherfucker. And at that point I was done, because it's, again, using alternate compilers, it just wasn't working for order. It's just too much bullshit to deal with for no reason. But, again, there's various reasons why it might not have been working for me, but a lot of times it's just all these needless hoops to jump through when you could have just not hard-coded a limit in the first fucking place. But there's different stuff like that where I mentioned this weird lighting issue I see all the time on Source Engine derived games, where with the maps, like, again, they're an extremely talented mapper even, and got a lot of experience, and I will still see this shit, usually on different kind of like trim sort of decorations, like I mentioned, or like, for an example, where a displacement meets a brush, where you can see the kind of like vertical face of it, of like a regular brush. And like, that is stuff that I would never miss, right? In my own levels, like, I would either, like I'd go through the pain of, like, using a info node or whatever the fuck you can't just point to another entity. You have to do some convoluted way, like, to change the lighting origin of the model, because even though vertex lighting is there in the newer versions of the engine, doesn't necessarily give you the result you want. Or I would increase luxel scales at certain junctures, to solve a lighting issue where, like, the face of a brush looked too dark. But that was another thing that I would do, is like basically chop up brushes, especially for trim textures, in such a way that the light maps basically had to work correctly. And so the trick is that if you have the the what the fuck is it called? The pediment or soffit or whatever, so the sort of like overhanging kind of trim on like the top of like a separating wall, um, like right at the edges where it kind of protrudes from the wall itself. If you make it a separate brush, like split vertically, the the lighting will essentially have to choose the luxels based off of the brush itself. But a lot of times they'll just have that top piece that's like a trim, if it's like three-dimensional, at the top of the wall, just overhanging, but it's like a single brush that's just wider. And the problem is the engine might split the faces up, especially if it's either solid, CSG, or if it's like funk detail or part of the same, brush entity. But the lighting is based off of the luxel positions across the whole face of the brush. And so what happens is a lot of times, especially a lot of people don't know that the luxel positions are based off of the texels of, the UV of the texture itself. And also sometimes you might want to position the texture to look a certain way on the surface, but that changes where the luxels are at. And if you want the apparent visual design of the diffuse texture, it might automatically stop you getting the lighting you want. But if it's kind of some nondescript repeating texture like concrete or like whatever with otherwise no, kind of surface characteristics, you can pretty well get away with just translating the texture until the light map grid looks correct in Hammer. But the way most people do the mapping, they don't really think about it. And what happens is where the light map has its color sampled at is in a part of the brush that's technically in shadow. And so because it's this sparse grid of light map samples that are interpolated when they're mapped over the regular textures, that one single basically black pixel now becomes this big dark smudge across the whole brush. And there's one part in particular where you can notice this. So when you got to do the thing in Half-Life 2, where, I mean, if you're me, you just, snipe the explosive barrels from the other side of the gate. But if you actually go up and go through it, to where like on Water Hazard, you got to like, make the thing swing to hit the gate so you can continue on, right? And it's got the part with like the guy on the turret or whatever. The room right next to the platform where you can like shoot the barrels to make the girders swing to hit the gate, that room in there's these support columns that have plinths on the bottom. So these flat pieces that are a bit wider than the column itself, and you can see what I'm talking about on those specifically. So they're this weird, just they look a lot darker than they should be. And in a lot of cases, you can just increase the light map scale to fix that. But, you might not necessarily want to do that. But another way that you could do it is actually where that plinth is, create 4 brushes out of it. Just chop it up. And a lot of times that will basically kind of auto-magically fix the problem. Because now it's sampling the lighting based off of the visible part of the brush face, as opposed to before where it was considering the whole face of the brush, even though most of it was technically beneath the column, right? This is stuff that I've always paid attention to, and of course I'm already fucking almost at 15 minutes. But hopefully I got most of my point across. But yeah, there's a lot of these terms that I'm aware of. Some of them, a few of them I had to look up because I wanted to be specific with what I said in that post. But yeah, that might be a separate video just on the architectural terminology. I started to sort of mention that in the previous video on the OSHA compliant crap. But yeah, whatever. I'm like legit out of time on this video. So I don't know. I'm not going to have enough time to think of anything in the next 10 seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and end this specific video here.